Our society's leader, Bart Worden, will be speaking today. This is Bart's 21st year as our society's leader, and good news, he's looking forward to increasing his activity with the congregation, and the board has he's not only increasing his time, we're increasing his compensation, so it all works out. Bart is also executive director of the American Ethical Union, the National Federation of Ethical Culture and Ethical Humanist Societies across the country, and is in addition a social worker who has worked with programs that help people recover from psychiatric disabilities. His theme for this year is Living Positively, an essential element of ethical humanism. Bart's address today is entitled, Our Stories Become Us, How Our Ethical Lives Are Built from Experience. Please welcome Bart to the podium.
Thank you, thank you. All right, let's see if I can get this so I can actually see and speak. So soon after we were married, an actor friend visited Ruth Ann and I in our apartment in Mount Vernon, and she was looking at the pictures and things that we had on the walls. And there was one poster in particular that caught her attention. This is a very small one, but it was one that was quite dear to Ruth Ann, and I really liked it quite a lot myself. And on this poster it said, "What one does, one becomes." And Ruth Ann, being an occupational therapist, is kind of clear. You know, this is the kind of thing that helping people function is really an essential element of what it means to do that work. And for me as a philosophical pragmatist, the whole notion of what works and what you do and deed above creed was just really important for me. And so seeing that poster was just a nice little shot in the arm and a reminder that, you know, when we get into experience, good things happen. So it was a surprise that my actor friend was really very distressed in reading this. And she explained that, you know, for her as an actor, she winds up doing all kinds of things that run counter to who she thinks of herself as a person. Right? And she hated the thought that somehow those activities that she had participated in were somehow becoming deeply a part of her, of who she was. She wanted to be able to divorce herself from that. So that really got me thinking about, you know, well, what is the role of the experiences that we have and the stories we tell ourselves about those experiences in who we are and how we make decisions and how we live our lives. So I think the main thing is it's important to recognize that ourselves are not something that we're born with. They are something that are created over the course of time, right? And they're built from the interplay that we have with our environment around us, and in particular with the people in our environments, right? It begins at the earliest days with our caregivers and how their connection to us helps us feel a part of the universe, helps us develop some sense of expectations about the things that will happen in our lives, and starts providing us the content that we will use to determine what it means to live in the world that we're in. The psychiatrist Sally Severino, in her article, The Biology of Morality, examined how our early interactions with our caregiving environment set the stage for our moral sensibilities. She was really quite interested in how people developed kind of a moral point of view. And she tied that pretty strongly to people's spiritual experiences, right? Because for her, she felt that our moral points of view were developed out of our emotional lives and our emotional connection to the universe around us. And she talked about what we called attuned consciousness. And that's like an interactive exchange of information and energy between one human being and another, between one human being and other elements of creation, even between different aspects within one human being. that is between our biological, our psychological, our social, and spiritual aspects. And so she views attuned consciousness as a manifestation of a spiritual aspect of people. In other words, we do have some kind of capacity to experience the world in a spiritual way, however you define spiritual. I mean, we're not talking here about disembodied spirit so much as that sense of connection that people get, right? That is something that is common to human beings in general. And she goes further to say that she thinks that the morality that people exhibit flows from the moods that are created during those moments of attuned consciousness with other people. So think about it in terms of those earliest years. That's probably the earliest time to think about the connection. They did a study of neonates, or the youngest babies. And people used to have the idea that when they were doing all kinds of baby talk with little infants and stuff like that, that they were kind of doing a call and response thing, right? They're Googling away, and then they're getting the baby to respond to what they're doing. And when they took high-speed films of these interactions, they came to realize that actually the communication goes the other way. Those Googling things that we tend to do when we're holding infants are prompted by the behavior of the babies. You can see they make moves first, and we respond to it, right? And we're attuned, right? We're looking, we're connecting, we're keeping that eye contact, and we're really noticing even these subtle, tiny differences and interplaying with that, right? That is a crucial building block to our lives, our connections with other people. And in fact, you can be attuned in ways that are very pleasant. You can also be attuned in ways that are very unpleasant. Right? So Severino talks about the role of what you would call dissonant attunement. And so that might be a case where, for instance, you're looking to be happy and the person that's looking back is frustrated or angry or upset in some kind of way, and that you can't seem to get that connection going where you're having this flow of comfortable communication. And Severino says, these kind of things are also building blocks of our morality, though building blocks of maybe a less positive form of morality, right? When you think about times when people are really fearing punishment or are afraid of things, those sorts of things, a lot of that, she would say, would be the product of dissonant attunements that we've had in our lives, right? Where we really were not in a safe space, the safe space of that kind of consonant attunement, but in a more dangerous one. And in fact, if it gets to the point of real physical danger, then you have the basis for trauma, right? And how badly trauma can really interfere with people's lives, right? There's been studies recently, if you look at people who have the most difficulties in various settings, in school, for instance, and track back, oftentimes you can find a direct correlation between the number of traumatic experiences they suffered and their current struggles with behaving, right? So trauma can really be injurious. And attunement, in a positive sense, can be really helpful and positive and hopeful, right? And that's what draws us into our communities. But it does it in kind of a layered fashion. In other words, you kind of have these repeats, right? And this is why we talk about this a lot in ethical culture, right? We're saying, you want to look to work at helping the best qualities of other people emerge, but you want to keep doing that, right? You want to keep doing it over and over again. It's iterative, right? Well, our whole sense of self is an iterative thing as well, right? We build ourselves up in layers. There's a short story by Sandra Cisneros that I used to share sometimes with the children, and it's called 11. I just want to read a little portion of that. What they don't understand about birthdays and what they never tell you is that when you're 11, you're also 10 and 9 and 8 and 7 and 6 and 5 and 4 and 3 and 2 and 1. And when you wake up on your 11th birthday, you expect to feel 11, but you don't. You open your eyes and everything's just like yesterday, only it's today. And you don't feel 11 at all. You feel like you're still 10, and you are underneath the year that makes you 11. Like some days you might say something stupid, and that's the part of you that's still 10. Or maybe some days you might need to sit on your mama's lap because you're scared, and that's the part of you that's 5. And maybe one day when you're all grown up, and maybe you will need to cry like if you're 3. And that's okay. That's what I tell Mama when she's sad and needs to cry. Maybe she's feeling 3. Because the way you grow old is kind of like an onion, or like the rings inside a tree trunk, or like my little wooden dolls that fit one inside the other, each year inside the next one. That's how being 11 years old is. You don't feel 11, not right away. It takes a few days, weeks even, sometimes even months before you say 11 when they ask you. And you don't feel smart 11, not until you're almost 12. That's the way it is. We build our experiences up, and all of our experiences have a story, right? And we have a narrator, right? Are people familiar with your narrators? What are you saying to yourself as you go through life? Right? And those are the stories that I'm talking about. The stories that become us are those narrated stories of our experiences, right? Because that's where we're bringing ourself to the moment as well. Right? And how we characterize what we do and say makes a big difference in terms of how we live our lives. Because quite frankly, if we didn't have a culture, if we didn't have a society, we really wouldn't have an identity. Right? All the thoughts and ideas that we're working on, they're kind of borrowed. Right? They don't really originate with us so much as they emerge out of our experience with other people. And oftentimes these are things that we get from other people. We hear about them, and then they kind of become our own over the course of time. And how we go about doing this can make a difference. You know, I've spent a fair number of years in therapy on actually both sides of the desk. And one of the things that was really striking to me was the importance of learning to talk about my experience with someone else in the room, and to be able to just say what was going on, and to just talk about that, and to start looking at how that fit into my sense of who I am, what I want to be, how I want to live my life. And in the course of therapy, oftentimes having someone else just listen to what you're saying can really be reparative, right? Because if somebody can listen without judging you for what you're doing, chances are you can at least have it there to be looked at. Give yourself a little empathy, because quite frankly, we're all probably trying pretty hard to live reasonably good lives. So give yourself a little empathy, and maybe make a door open for some creative thought, for some new ideas to seep in that you might apply to some of the more difficult parts of your living. And learning to do that with someone else in the room also makes it possible to do that once you leave the office. In other words, it becomes a skill. It's part of the story that you carry with you, is the story of being able to talk to yourself. Now, earlier I was asking you what you would start an elevator speech with, right? So if you had to ride an elevator between, what do they say, lingerie and housewares, 13 seconds, what would you say about yourself? And one of the reasons I posed that question is I had an experience with someone when I was working in the mental health field. And this was a young woman who really had a hard life. She had a physical disability, she had issues with vision, and she felt she looked a little strange, and yet she was just such a glorious soul. I mean, she was somebody who really cared about other people, she was thoughtful, but she had these wounds that she carried with her. And when she would come into the room, she would knock very quietly and say, "It's just me." I encouraged her to say, no. It's me, right? It's me. Let's get the expansion going. Let's see how we are connecting, and let's relish that a bit. Let's feel the connection that we have with other people and enjoy it. Feel it. Come with it, right? Because these are the pieces that can really bring us out of ourselves, that can help us become people that we admire and that we want to be. It's hard, though, right? Because on the one hand, we are the creator of our experiences, and on the other end, we're kind of the victims of them, right? In other words, because we have to draw upon our environment so much, it's not a done deal that we get to pick and choose the things that we want to stay inside of us and to be part of us, and let go of the things that we wish weren't. Right? So it's really important that we figure out some pathways that will help us have a sense of agency about who we are, right? In other words, that help us be in positions where we get to at least reflect on what we're thinking and doing, and possibly make some choices about that. As well as get ourselves into situations where those kind of things are supported, right? Because, quite frankly, so let's look at this from the point of view of people often come into an ethical society and say, oh, yes, I feel like I'm with like-minded people. Anyone ever said that when they come here? Right? I know I felt that when I came here. I felt like I was talking almost, not really to myself, but to someone who was enough like me that it gave me a real charge and a good sense of well-being. And I felt like, yeah, all right, I can come here, I can talk about the things that I care about. People can hear that, take it in, accept it, and be good with it. And that has such a lovely quality. Right? Doesn't it kind of lift you and help you feel buoyed and help you feel almost spiritual, right? That's that connection, that attunement that we were starting with at the beginning. And yet there's a downside to that too, right? Because the same things that help us hold ourselves together can also wind up being the outlines, the limitations that make it a little bit harder for us to push outward and to expand and to explore. This week, for instance, there's been a lot of activity in Virginia. Anyone been following Virginia? We had the situation with people that had done things in their past that were probably pretty consonant with their environment, right? And that they could do without thinking because they were like-minded people. And who knows whether they meant harm or did not mean harm. One thing I just feel sure about is it didn't really feel out of step with who they are, right? And so when we stick with the people that are most like us, we do leave ourselves at risk for this kind of thing, right? Because those people who are like us are going to have the same kind of vulnerabilities, shall we say, that we're likely to have. So in addition to finding those people that we feel such consonance with, we also need to find people who we can learn from because they have a very different perspective. And learning to be attuned in a consonant way with people who have a different perspective can really open your doors to having a broader perception of the kind of things you can do as a person in your daily life. For me, I've been spending a fair number of years trying to sort out my own racism, trying to deal with my own white privilege, and trying to find ways to get myself more comfortable in a broader world than in the more closeted world that I tend to inhabit. And it's tough. It is not easy to do. I find that my fears and my limitations just keep being really present, and I'm much more rigid about things than I ever expected myself to be. And when I try to break out of that, then I start to feel scared and troubled and unmoored, right? And so there is a real need for us to build stories with people who are different from us over the course of time. Back to that onion layers again. It isn't the kind of thing where you do one story and you're done. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes attention, it takes repeating, going over it again and again before you get into places where you have a confidence in yourself that you can experience different kind of things without losing who you are. Because our stories really, they are what bring us a sense of continuity about who we are. They bring us a sense of our integrity. That is to say, it helps us understand kind of who we are in relation to who we are not. And hopefully it builds up a sense of a foundation around who we can be. You know, I think that the central message for me in ethical culture is two things. You know, one is that there is potential within people to be more than who they currently are. There is a potential for us to be better, to do better, to interact better, to bring more beauty into this world that we're living in. And it only happens when we have deep connections with each other. It doesn't happen if we just kind of come up with these things in our own heads. It has to be coming into the space, that consonance, that connection that we have with each other. That's where the energy is. And when we find ways to do that, we have the opportunity to create a world that is so much more enjoyable and exciting, deep, rich, and beautiful than maybe we even imagine. So I invite you all to step into the room and say, I'm here. I'm here. And to look for the other people who can respond to your being present. Thanks.